The topic today on Faith Mysteries is, does God exist? It's kind of an age-old question, isn't it? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, does God exist? That's probably a question that everyone's thought about. Maybe you've made up your mind, maybe you're not sure. It's a question that's asked frequently, and religious circles and scientific circles, really just for everyone. And let me just give you a few statistics. Gallup poll in 1953 did a survey and asked Americans if they believed in God, and 98%, yes, that's right, 98% said yes. Fast forward to 2022, a couple of years ago, 81% said they believed in God. Obviously, a big decline. There's lots of possible reasons why that might be. I don't know if I'll have time to go into those in this discussion, but there's evidence that it is declining. What gets more interesting is if you try to separate out certain kinds of people. In 2009, Pew Research Center did a survey of American scientists. And the question that was asked was a little different. It wasn't, do you believe in God? It was, do you believe in God? And then there was a category, higher power, not sure, definitely don't, agnostic. But when you group together the categories of believe in God and higher power, it was about 50%, but it was just 33% that said they believed in God. So obviously a big decline from general Americans to Americans who are scientists. And in 1998, I know that's outdated, all right, but it's the most recent statistics I could find about the National Academy of Sciences and members of that organization. So these are elite scientists, okay? And instead of 33% believing in God, it's 7%. And the way that question was asked is a little bit different. They had a spectrum from strongly disagree to strongly agree that God exists. The strongly disagree that God exists was like 70%. So, and when you went up to strongly agree, it was only 7%. The somewhat agree and, kind of not sure, those numbers were very, very small. So, yes, when you get to the elite scientists, the numbers really drop. 2013, the journal Evolution, Education and Outreach did a survey of the Fellows of Royal Society, which is similar to the National Academy of Sciences, but it's just for scientists in Britain. And 5% of those believed in God. So you might say, well, my gosh, these scientists are really smart. If they don't believe in God, then why should I believe in God? Doesn't that prove that God doesn't exist? And if you get nothing else out of this, I just want everybody to understand that there's no reason for you to believe that God doesn't exist just because some smart people believe that. And I want to kind of underscore that by saying there's a huge difference between science and religion. Can they overlap? Can religious people study scientific stuff? Yes. Can scientific people believe in God? Yes. But what science is capable of doing is establishing things that are repeatable by conducting experiments. So it has no chance of discovering whether God exists or not, or knowing whether he does or not. There's no way that they can know that. Now, what happens is a lot of these scientists are professors at prestigious universities, so they'll be in a classroom and they'll be teaching whatever the subject is, biology or sociology or whatever it is, and they're going to introduce ideas that are sympathetic towards God not existing. For example, the theory of evolution has no need for God. it tries to prove scientifically that all the different animals and man that in life that exist, God had no part in that. Has that been proven? No. Will they tell you it has? Yes. And that's a whole nother video that I want to do sometime. But as far as how they conduct their classroom, it might come across, whether intentionally or unintentionally, that they think that they're proving that God doesn't exist, and students might fall into a trap of believing that. But I just want everybody to understand that no scientist can prove to you that God doesn't exist, because it's two totally different kinds of thinking. All right. I want to talk for a minute about evidence for God, which of course I believe that, and then I want to talk about evidence against God, which other people might try to put forward. Evidence for God, you can look in the Bible and you can take him at his word. At creation, he created everything by sending Jesus. He has redeemed everyone. There's a story there that all connects. If you take the picture in its totality, my belief is that when you see all that, it makes sense in my brain, in my heart, in my spirit. So yes, I believe that God exists from that. But I also think you can see God in nature. And the biggest thing, and this actually is a scientific thing, all right? All life forms are made out of something called the DNA molecule. So the DNA codes for genes and traits. We talked about this in a different video a little bit. The genes also code for all the cells in your body, all the organs, how they're going to be constructed. Here's a funny thing though. Where does DNA come from? So like a lot of times you have a cause and effect and you say, well, this thing produced this thing, and then this thing produced another thing, and then so on and so on and so on. Here's an interesting fact. DNA is a self-replicating molecule. So it has the instructions for all of the genes that decide what all of the traits are going to be for you, what all the cells are going to be for you, all the proteins in your body, all of the organs are going to be put together in your body. But where does it come from? It's a self-replicating molecule. RNA and proteins and other enzymes help to coordinate the self-replication. But where do they come from? Interesting. DNA produces them as well. So DNA produces things that help replicate itself. Whenever you have something that is self-referential, it's hard to break out of that. It's self-contained. It didn't arise from something simpler and turn into this. It's a self-contained system. For me, that is strong evidence for God. And then there's just so many different things in nature that to me speak to God. And again, I'm not going to list all of them, but just one thing, like if you look at beauty in creatures, we know that there are animals that live in the bottom of the ocean that are colorful, and you can't see them down there because it's so dark. So there's no useful purpose for those colors down there. But when you do take cameras down there and shed light on it, it's gorgeous. These creatures are gorgeous. My view is that God has made some things, some living things, beautiful, and there's no other good purpose except to say that they're beautiful. What are some other evidences for God in nature? If you just look at instincts, some instincts are for survival, like for a baby, the rooting and sucking instinct. Where did that come from? A baby doesn't look at another baby and copy it, right? It's ingrained into the DNA of that baby. So it knows what to do without thinking about it. So that that has to be there on day one. So it's interesting. Obviously, the mammary glands for a female, are there to provide milk for the baby. But if the baby doesn't have the rooting and sucking instinct, it's not going to get those nutrients. So both have to be there at the same time. It's kind of like here's a need and here's an instant solution. It's just really hard for me to believe that those things came along randomly over time and just happened to coexist at the right moment for survival to occur. To me, it's more likely that they were both created together. And I could go on and on. Again, I would like to make a video someday of all the wonderful evidences for God's design in nature. I did read some things on the internet about people who argue against God. Like they'll say, who created God? You know, they'll say that it's illogical. If God exists, someone must have created him. In my view, either God exists or he doesn't. If he doesn't exist, then you got to ask yourself, how did matter get here? Because there is matter in the universe. If he does exist, you got the question of who created him. No matter how you look at it, you've got a question that we can't answer. So to me, it goes both ways. How can a loving God allow evil is a question a lot of people ask. That's a mysterious thing. I did talk about this in a previous video about what is evil. And I got a friend of mine that's going to possibly make another video about this very question. But the fact of the matter is, we don't know why. That doesn't mean he doesn't exist. It just means we don't understand his mind. If God is real, then why doesn't he prove himself to me? And by the way, a lot of these questions, people will say, well, if I were God, this is how I would do it. You got to be careful when you hear that from people, because you're not God, so you don't know what you would do if you were God. But I do hear people say this to me. Well, I would believe in God if he would just prove it to me. And I say, well, what would you need? You know, an airplane in the sky just, saying, I exist to Joe, if Joe was the one that, wanted proof. You got to be careful with that, because if you're requiring God to do things to prove himself to you, then you become God, right? Because then you're in charge of him, telling him what to do. Somebody says, well, Christians, they don't even believe in God, so why should I believe in God? And you might say, well, what are they talking about? Well, they'll say Christians don't believe in God because they see doctors. If they really believed that God was all-powerful, they would just go to God to heal every problem that they have, and they wouldn't need to see a doctor. Again, not understanding the relationship between God and us. We don't control God. Sometimes he can heal someone miraculously. Oftentimes he doesn't. He does give us a lot of intelligence, and thankfully we have doctors that can heal us too. We go to doctors for healing, understanding that God is all powerful and that he has given us many different gifts. And there are a lot of other things that people will say. But I see my time is getting long, so I better stop here. The one thing I wanted just to stress to everybody is, no matter how smart someone says they are, they cannot prove to you that God doesn't exist. It's an impossible. You either believe he doesn't exist on faith, or you believe he does exist on faith. So, God bless you all. Love you. See you next week.